Hi everybody, Patrick Reagan here, writer and director of Mindworms. A 10-year-long journey that is complete at this point, and man does it have a story to tell. Yeah, I wanted to do this as a little behind-the-scenes kind of documentary. I wanted it to do something like even more than my previous behind-the-scenes documentaries, and go into much more depth on how it was made, because like I said, it has a story to tell. So without further ado, let's go all the way back to the beginning. And I mean all the way back to the beginning. Back to my ultrasound. Nah, I'm just kidding, it doesn't have to be that far back. So I guess I was really just born being a creative person. You know, it's like even when I was a little kid, I used to reenact scenes with action figures and toys. You know, for my favorite films, I used to do little storyboards. It's like before I had any idea of the concept of filming anything, I used to do little storyboards and even some little comic strips that would, you know, tell my own story, kind of show, you know, which kind of camera angle and everything like that you would use. I'm pretty sure, you know, a lot of us, when we were little kids, like even Spielberg talked about this, would play with an action figure and then we kind of look at it in a certain way, you know, basically be our own camera. So I did a lot of that, and I used to see, you know, a lot of video stuff because, you know, I was very interested in movies. I was very interested in VHS tapes, especially. You know, a lot of us in the 90s grew up with stuff like that, like VHS tapes of the Disney films, VHS tapes of any films, and then we even went to DVD, but we still had our VHS tapes. I still have a crap load of VHS tapes because you can buy them cheap at like thrift stores. So anyway, I used to watch, you know, videos of myself, and I was always very intrigued by it, like the idea that they could record a moment and put it on a tape for us to watch. And so, you know, I always used to love seeing videos of myself. I mean, sometimes they plugged the camera into the TV or it would be recording and playing on the TV at the same time. So I just play around with that as if it was, as if it was like a mirror, but it was on record and on a TV, so that was also awesome. Then after a while, just thinking more about this, I decided I wanted to go into film production. Especially in 5th grade, the first film I ever did was a really, really crappy, cringy film called Superman vs. Scarecrow. This is when Batman Begins came out. I was interested in Scarecrow as a villain. I had an action figure of him, but I didn't have an action figure of Batman yet. So I figured I'd use Superman because, you know, they're in the same universe. And it was bad. I'd rather not show the whole thing. It's just cringy to look at. And I did do a sequel to it that was a little better. I mean, it actually had music composed by me rather than me just singing. And that time, with the sequel, I had a Batman action figure, so I was able to actually get Batman back. Along with that, one of our first real films that we did was my brother and I did a ripoff of Star Wars called Space Wars. And we were trying to be original. I didn't really get the concept of being original. This is basically just like one of those spoofs of Star Wars you'd see on a show like Fairly Odd Parents or something like that. Not to mention the bad guy's name was Dark Laser, just like Dark Laser from Fairly Odd Parents, of course. And so instead of using toy lightsabers, we used these paper lightsabers. And yes, it was really cringy, it was really bad. But we all gotta start somewhere.
You can never ever beat me again. I am your father.
And so that was back So that was like the first 10 years of my life. And then in 6th grade, I got my very, very first own video camera. In fact, I still have the camera. I have it as a keepsake. It doesn't work anymore. And it wasn't really a great camera, but for me, it was just awesome having this camera. I could record stuff. I could do my own stop motion. I could do my own videos. And so I started to do that. I didn't have a way of editing them yet. It's like I didn't know about editing, so they never really got finished until a lot later. But I still finished a good amount of short little videos with this camera. Mostly using like my brother and my little cousins, and sometimes getting some help from the parents. And around this time, this is when the idea for Mindworms started to take shape. So the initial idea started as a writing project. When I was in, I think, 7th grade, we were in this periodic class where we'd write little stories. I mainly wrote like funny ones, such as one about a camp with rabid squirrels. I hope I still have that somewhere in my bedroom. And, I wrote one, it was a blatant ripoff of another person's story because, we all gotta start somewhere, and nothing's 100% original, but I still didn't get the concept of making it, my own thing. So basically the story was about this group of kids who formed a group called the Nerds, and they would fight back these bullies. And so I decided I wanted to do that as a film, like a comedy. I even wrote a draft. I even tried to change the Nerds to the Geeks. In fact, if you look in Mindworms, you see that little fake arcade cabinet with the Geeks that was based on like the original idea. And the original idea then became a ripoff of Ghostbusters. And when I say ripoff, I don't mean it in a way that I was trying to cash grab, but more like, when it comes to the films I was trying to rip off, I just loved them so much that I wanted to do my own version. So at first it was a ripoff of Ghostbusters because I saw that film for the first time. Then around like 2008, when I was in marching band, that's when I started to really come out of my shell and meet newer, non-douchey people in high school. And here I was also coming up with a lot of ideas. Like I was getting really introduced into the horror genre, starting with movies like Watch from the Woods and Gremlins. Especially Gremlins. I don't know why, but I absolutely loved that movie. And then, I wanted to do my own version, so I decided to change the Geeks to a ripoff of Gremlins. And somewhere in there, it was actually going to be a ripoff of the Super Mario Brothers movie. Because while it definitely is not one of the greatest movies ever, I will admit that I'm one of those people who actually loves the Super Mario Brothers movie. So I was actually going to have the Geeks going into like a dystopian dinosaur-like world. And that didn't work, so then I was going to do a ripoff of Gremlins where they would fight these little creatures. And you would even feature them at the high school band because I was, just in love with the high school band and wanted to feature it in a film somehow. Like later on, I decided I wanted to do a film or a TV show based on my adventures in high school band. But, that's another story for the future. And then I still felt like, even though there are a lot of Gremlins ripoffs, especially in the 80s, like Critters, well, that's debatable actually, or Ghoulies, I really wanted to do something different. And then I saw the movie Arachnophobia for the first time in 2009, and I was going to do the film as a ripoff of Arachnophobia, especially set in the country setting and have a little bit of a Tremors vibe. But nothing worked, so I eventually just canceled the project. I got all the drawings I had for the characters and just stuck it in the closet just to forget about it. I was going to work on other films, like an atmospheric horror film called They Hunt Again, and some kind of, comedy based on Mr. Bean. Like, I was going to do a ripoff of Mr. Bean called Mr. Ned, which I did do a few episodes of, and also try to explore some kind of band comedy. And so those original drawings sat in the closet for a while until 2010, when I had the dream. So this scene in the Mindworms where Tiffany is having the dream about the worms coming out of the meat, that was meant to kind of recreate what I had in the dream. So it was 2010. I was 15 years old at the time. And I had this very, very interesting dream. In my dream, we had these packages of meats. And then later on, out of the meat came these weird worms. They were like alien parasites. And the cow that the meat came from drank from the pond that's like across from our house, our current one that we live in right now. And they had to literally drain it to see if they could find any more of those worms. When I woke up, I figured it was on my mind. I was thinking, that's a good idea. That would make a good movie. That would make like a good sci-fi B movie. And so I started working on ideas, and my brother gave me the idea to do it as Mindworms. And I even watched him play a video game about zombies being taken over by parasites, and so that gave me the idea. It's like, I have an idea. And obviously brain worms would be the more appropriate title since they take over the brain rather than the consciousness, but let's face it, Mindworms just sounds much better. And when doing that, I was writing some original characters, and I figured, wait a minute, what if I got the idea for the geeks involved in this? So I got the idea, but I decided to get rid of like the whole thing of them starting a group called the Geeks, and decided to just, make it, the teenagers. And I was getting introduced to other horror films such as The Evil Dead. Like, I became introduced to that, and I was kind of turned off from watching it until I was 17 because it was originally X-rated, and it had that one scene in there that I really don't like. But anyway, I was thinking about, Sam Raimi, and I was looking at a lot of his Super 8 films, and Sam Raimi was a huge influence for me. I could identify a lot with him. Like, I love The Evil Dead. I love looking at his Super 8 films, and I could identify with that a lot, because I used to do little short films, and his films, were little rip-offs of the Three Stooges, and I did the same with Mr. Bean. I was a huge Mr. Bean fan. I had my own Mr. Bean rip-off. So I'm like, I can identify with this guy. I'd say he's probably my third favorite director. My first was Tim Burton. He's the one who really inspired me, especially with his stop-motion films like Nightmare Before Christmas and Corpse Bride. Then there's Steven Spielberg, especially when I found out that he did Indiana Jones, especially because Raiders of the Lost Ark is my most favorite film of all time, and the stunt show at Disney was what, really sparked my interest in becoming a filmmaker. And then Sam Raimi, he became like my third favorite filmmaker. Like, I always used to watch videos about him, watch his short films, read about him on internet pages, and it's like, I just love this guy, and I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be Sam Raimi. And so in 2010, I kept working on the idea. I even worked on other ideas for short films. Especially in 2010, I had an awesome family reunion, which some footage of that was actually incorporated in my slasher film, Farmer Next Door. And, I tried to recruit some people. I tried to get, some of my family members and relatives to be actors. I wasn't too comfortable talking to my friends at high school about that because I live in the South and most of them were a bunch of redneck douchebags, although I found much better people along the way. Then in 2011, I finished the very, very first draft of Mindworms. It wasn't very good, but you gotta start somewhere. It's like, for one, in this first draft, what you basically had was, I was originally going to have where there's just going to be one zombie in it, which would be Lucian at the very end, and then the sequels would have more zombies. But, obviously I added some more zombies in the first one, so that way there would be more threats. And so in this first draft, there's a lot of filler. There's a character named Jonathan, and there's like a whole love triangle subplot between Jonathan, Tiffany, and Cody that just went nowhere. And there's even like a subplot where the character of Lily and then the character of Ellie were originally supposed to be sisters who would be adopted by Cody's parents at the end. They would have like a mean, nasty, bitchy mother named Beatrice Gertrude who would get killed, and it was meant to be like Mrs. Deagle from Gremlins. But that just didn't work, so that was an idea that changed eventually. But, I still saw the potential, and I decided to tweak it a little bit. Another thing I changed is, let's say, at the beginning, I always had it planned for it to just, start out with a group of rednecks who would go redneck fishing with a grenade, and it would cause, the worms to come out of the lake because you had the asteroid underneath it. And then I had a better idea of how to start it. So along comes 2012. It's the summer. It's before I started my senior year of high school. At this point, I was also introduced to the Alien movies. And then my dad, my brother, and I, and a few friends went to go see the movie Prometheus, the prequel to Alien. And, I saw, I had the idea that maybe I'd do a prequel to Mindworms. And I loved how, it talked about this stuff, especially with the engineer guy in Alien with his chest bursted open, and he was in that ship that was from Prometheus. And obviously Prometheus is not a very good film. My friend Ian Waller, talked about that very good, but I'm one of those who actually kind of liked it. I mean, it probably hasn't held up very much, but there's still a few things that I did like about it. And so I tried to incorporate those ideas. And then I eventually went, to a summer camp. It was like a summer survival camp, and it was awesome, and I had a lot of really good friends there. I wish I brought my camera to take videos of that. But there were a lot of things that we learned there, especially, before that I went to a forensics camp, and I'm a huge fan of forensics. It's one of my narrow interests is forensic stuff, especially with the macabre. Especially love shows like Monk and all that. And I decided to incorporate both those ideas because when we were in the survival camp, there are two locations I loved to visit that we visited. One was the Okatama River, and the second was Lake Thoreau. And so I figured I'd add a whole beginning, which would be where Dr. Bond and the scientists travel the lake or the river, and then, travel through the forest and find that corpse that was buried there since the Civil War. And then I'd do a prequel that would talk about, that corpse and its origin there. And then it would lead to the rednecks waking up the worms. Then 2012 is where I really got my groove. I finished a second draft, which was better, but still had a lot of flaws. One of the major changes was I cut out the whole love triangle and just removed Jonathan. Although Jonathan eventually came back in the final film as that character, Jonathan Lubitsch. In 2012, this is when high school was much, much better because I was hanging out with people who are a little younger than me as opposed to the people I went to high school with who are my age, because most of those I really didn't like most of those people. I'm not talking about all of them, just most of them by and large. And I was in a Spanish class, and I absolutely loved that class. That's where I met friends like Courtney Thompson and Corin Roberts. In fact, that's when I first met Corin Roberts and found out that a lot of them had the same interests as me. I mean, one of them had an idea for a vampire show, and we were actually going to try to work on that, but sadly it never came to full fruition. But I never forgot about that. And I still have, a copy of their script that they did for one of the scenes. But I was coming up with more ideas. I was becoming much more open to talking to people about my ideas. And along with that, I also decided, that my senior project would be some kind of film. I didn't know what I was going to do at first, and I decided I'd do a little stop-motion comedy talking about the band. So I went through a few first ideas. I was going to have our previous drum majors, but that wouldn't work, so I decided I'd limit it to a few other characters. And then we had Thanksgiving, and every Thanksgiving at the band hall, we always ate, talked about what we were thankful for, and had a little moment of reconvening and talking, and I did that for the interviews. And then we eventually premiered it, and the high school band was my very first premiere, and I never forgot that moment. I definitely never will, because it was a wonderful moment. And my senior project, Why Summerall Band Was Fun, while it was not my first film, it was the first film I ever finished, and it was the first film I ever showed to people. In fact, I even showed it to the judges, and it got an A, especially on the portfolio, and it was overall really, really great. And then, obviously, in 2012, we had the whole bullshit about the apocalypse. And obviously, I didn't believe in that, but I was still just absolutely terrified of it, just because of all the mass hysteria coming, and just was mad that people were believing a lot of this shit. And obviously, the world didn't end, and we went to 2013. Should also note that in 2012, I also got introduced to a YouTuber named F.W. Waller and watched some of his videos and enjoyed them. And there is something to, that story's going to lead to, but that'll come a little later. So just pin that to the wall. So later on, in 2013, I decided to come up with more ideas. I decided my senior project was a hit. My next film was going to be a horror film, a short slasher film called Lumberjack. I wrote a script, and I filmed different scenes, and I showed it to people. And no matter what happened, no matter how hard we scheduled it, nobody would show up. I probably picked some of the wrong people, and they just never showed up or messaged me, and we just, it never got done, unfortunately. And along this time, I was actually getting upset because I was loving my high school experience at that point. And at that point, I was getting ready for college, I was leaving my friends, and then we were moving to the countryside in Hickory Grove.
Hey guys, how do? Me, Larry, or Patrick Reagan. I got a new video camera. Of course, I can't really show you because I don't have a mirror and everything, but I got a new cinematographer video camera, and I just decided to share a little video. Let me show you a little, maybe this will be a little picture. There's a little picture on the manual. And here's another good picture.
But I still stayed in touch with my friends at high school, and I missed it so much that I kept visiting whenever I could. I visited the band in band camp. And then while visiting, that's when I also first met Clint Phillips. I shouldn't say it's the first time, but it's the first time we really, really met and got to know each other.
Well, we were I was in band, and you were coming to watch the shows and everything, and I guess you were bringing Nick there or something. And I recognized you from when we were kids, so I went over and chatted with you, and then I started telling you about my dreams and everything that I used to have. And you decided that you to tell me about your movies that you were filming, and I thought it would be pretty cool to join in.
And so periodically, I would hang out at his house, and I'd meet some of his friends like Sidney Rawls, Matt Brantley, and that's when we started coming up with more ideas, which I added to the script. So then I wrote the third draft of Mindworms, and it was written more like a script format. This is before I had Celtics. And it was improving a little bit, but it still had its issues. After talking to Sidney Rawls, that's when I got the idea of adding a few more zombies in there. So I did that with, drafts 4 and 5, except it was a little different. It had other characters who never made it in the final film, including a doctor. Which you could say Dr. Jack the Quack was kind of the replacement. In 2013, I was also trying to write a slasher film. I wrote a slasher film called Checkmate. And then, I was also in college, so I just didn't have a lot of free time. And I was kind of in a really bad mental state because I was just missing my friends from high school, and nothing seemed fun anymore, and I wasn't getting a lot of work done. I also didn't get a lot of stop motion work done because I was staying at my grandparents' while our house was being built, and my stop motion stuff was all in storage. Luckily, it was a cool storage room, but it was still in storage. Like filming with this thing. Near the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, I also tried to do an animated sitcom based on my adventures in high school band. Never got around to finishing it, but I do have plans to revisit it, or revisit something similar to that. But these are some of the animations, and using the blue screen, especially on Pinnacle Studio, really brought me back because it reminded me of, classic Bandcamp. I was also working on They Hunt again. Here's an experimental, like, decaying, similar to The Evil Dead when the zombies decay at the end, using the skull, kind of precursor to what I do in Mindworms. I was also experimenting with the green screen because I was using Pinnacle Studio at the time. I quit that because Pinnacle and Windows Movie Maker are competing, so they never work together. There's my cousin Matt Baxter. I mean.
I want to, but mine's too tall. Why don't we switch
Okay,
them
just
around?
how about you guys? You
Yeah.
can just go like this, just.
I want to get on the bike.
Have you ride it, and maybe when you get the tires aired up. Just frightened, and look back a few times at least. Have this face on you, because there's something about to run over you. It could hurt you. And there's me being Jacob Marley, because I was going to do a short film based on A Christmas Carol, and that was me playing as Jacob Marley with the chains and the mask and the thing around. But that never came to full fruition. So eventually 2014 came along. So then came 2014, which was very, very stressful. I enjoyed the classes, at the end of my first year, my second semester, but that was also my very last math class, and I can tell you I hate math with a passion. But luckily I passed that class, and that was the last math course I ever had to take. I have not taken a math course ever since. But then, I was afraid because I felt like I had a burnout. But then I just went back to writing scripts, and I went on a full renaissance. I wrote an idea for a horror film called The Farmer Next Door. Well, no, I didn't write The Farmer Next Door yet, but I wrote an idea for The Unholy Land. I wrote a script for a comedic murder mystery. I wrote a script for, a story about a demonic phone calls from a cell phone. I wrote some crime stories. I wrote a comedy called Drag Race. And I even tried to do some animations for Drag Race because it was going to combine live action and stop motion, but it never came to full fruition. Then in 2014, I visited the band like usual, and I was feeling a little bit better because my favorite people who were still in high school have graduated. So I got to talk to them more regularly. And I had better classes. I even had a biology class, and, I was the teacher's nicest student, and I had, a few good friends there, and I met with the Wesley Foundation, and it took me a while to get used to it, but that's when I started to really, gain more friends in college. Along with that, I also went back to my stop motion. I started on 25 Cents of Stupidity, which was a remake of an animated film I did a while back.
You cut my rope. But, oh, you want to tussle? Ladies first. Yo, no. Oh, dear God, my eyes, oh! Atomic wedgie!
And here's some animations I did in 2014, including this one for a post-apocalyptic thriller, which, would have explored a lot of stop motion, especially these mutants. And I would have used a lot of green screen, a lot of miniatures. It would have that Ray Harryhausen charm. Obviously, it never got made, but I never stopped thinking about it, and I might even revisit it sometime in the future. It would be a short film that I just do, with my little cousins and maybe some of my friends. And there are some shots for whenever stuff is being thrown. Some stop motion, because it has a lot of potential, it has a lot of charm, so I might revisit this. But just in case I never revisit, here's some footage, and that's a toy that I got a while back. My dad apparently drove in one of those in real life. At the same time, I was also getting introduced to some new films. Like, I got introduced to John Carpenter's The Thing, which I first watched in 2012, but I didn't know what to make of it. Then I watched in 2014, it became one of my absolute most favorite films of all time. I could not get enough of it. And then I watched Peter Jackson's Bad Taste, and that was a turning point for me. Bad Taste is definitely one of the most delightfully insane, influential, independent films of all time. And that's what really showed me what Mindworms should be about. It should be like this silly, goofy B-movie that does not take itself seriously at all. And then I was also wanting to do something very childish because I was feeling upset in college because of a lot of stuff going on, a lot of topical stuff. So I really wanted to try and do something very childish. So I also wrote this Alien movie. I actually wrote a script for it and did some animations. And it was going to be childish and full of, like, fart jokes and bathroom jokes and everything like that. And I will revisit it. It's just, this is something I came up with in 2014 to help, stave off the depressed state I was in, which the year 2014, especially in the fall, really helped out a lot with that, too. And then along with that, I also decided to try to do Lucien's face melting from Mindworms. And so I first did an experiment where I used paint instead of fake blood, but I built up the muscular system, and here it is in just a little bit. After this. This right here was once just a cheap plastic skull I got from Walmart, and I added some facial muscles. Here's a worm that will crawl out of his mouth. Here's like a worm tongue. Here's his face. This is the other side. I need to add some red to it. This is the inner side. It has these little worms to show that the worms are. Right now, we are practically done with it. So I finished the climax of my first feature-length film. Now I'm going to put all this stuff up and clean up. And obviously it wasn't very good. I mean, the blue screen isn't as bad as I remember it to be, but it definitely did not work very well. And so I decided to stay up all night at my grandma's and work on a little background set. And then the next day, I automatically went back to my house, which was very close, and did the second draft. And so I rebuilt the muscular system, and I used paint again. And here we are with the second one. One of the problems was I didn't put cotton underneath. I mean, here I actually put some cotton so that way I could represent, tendons and stuff. But it didn't work, so I did this third draft, and it was much better. I did a 4th draft, but I love both of them so much that I combined this 3rd draft with the 4th draft. And so, you definitely see the potential, and it looks much more gory and much more realistic. And so then I visited Clint when he had Matt Brantley over. That was the first time I really truly met him. And we talked about ideas, and we did the voices for 25 Cents of Stupidity, and then we filmed some scenes for a film called The Haunting of an Escaped Convict, which we hoped to get done quickly that year, but ironically it took 3 years to make. And with that film, it was going to be like Bad Taste in The Thing, where it was going to be an all-male cast, because we didn't know any girls who would be in the film. And my friends had never heard of those films, never knew there could be an all-male cast movie, so they made a joke that 2 of the guys had to pretend to be a gay couple to make up for that.
Chip, well...
I'm done. Oh, really, friends? Wrong light!
Let's start over again.
What? Wrong light. It's supposed to be that light. You imbecile. You imbecile.
I think I'm having a heart attack.
But also that night, I also got a lot of really good ideas from Matt. He gave me the ideas such as Cody being an inventor, and having the rod, and having the catchphrase, the according to my calculations, you're, well, you know.
According to my calculations, you're
So then, I went about that year, and then came 2015, and that's when it really was just bad at first.
seems like I fixed these fishing poles up good. Let's see. Thought I had a pencil around here somewhere.
So 2015 came, and a lot of my friends just were not being very fun or enjoyable anymore, and I could not get any work done. And so then I decided I was going to do stuff on my own, especially when I went to film school. And I was just really, really depressed that time because a lot of my friends, just were not cooperating and nothing was getting done, and I just felt like I was never going to get Mindworms done. So then I decided in real time I'd also work on a feature film called The Summer of Life, which would be based on my adventures in high school band. I did finish a few other films in 2015, including Nutcrackers, Baseball Gone Wrong, and a sequel to 25 Cents of Stupidity called $25 of Stupidity. In fact, Nutcrackers and Baseball Gone Wrong were actually remakes of little DSI flip note films that I did, because I used to do little cartoons on that. And of course, I had a falling out with some of my friends. I was getting used to going to school on the coast. And I decided I was going to do a horror film. I decided to do my very first horror film called 4 Steps to Insanity. And I was very inventive because, I was trying to practice with lip movement, like making it in sync as opposed to talking like this. And then, I also decided, to come up with an inventive way to do a creepy cemetery. So here, what I did here was I got like a black piece of, felt, and I put little artwork on it, and I poked a hole where the lantern would be so that a flashlight would be shining through it, and it would look like this creepy cemetery with the little lantern. So this is, what I'm doing with the special effects for 4 Steps to Insanity. This is the black piece of felt that I had the artwork on. And you'll see in a little bit that I cut a hole in the back where the lantern would be and shined a flashlight through and then turned off the light, but also had like a backlight from the bathroom so it wasn't pitch dark, and it looked really nice. At the same time, I also worked on, this is when I started to, show one of my narrow interests, which is caves. So, I made this fake little cave or tomb out of, some cardboard boxes, and just added some stuff, especially from Indiana Jones action figures. And then, of course, I used little streamer things from Easter baskets for vines. I used cotton for cobwebs and did the animation like this. This is some of my very first behind-the-scenes footage that I did. And then for the torch, I also used Microsoft Paint, because that's back when I was a PC user. I'm a Mac user now. And I had to do it like a little bit frame by frame, just so that way it would look like there was some kind of glow and some kind of fire coming off the torch. That way it didn't just look like a plastic torch. And I did the animations, and it actually worked really well for what it was. And I also was experimenting with doing like a whole dream sequence, which I reused in Mindworms, where you'd actually see through the eyes, like point of view, the eyes closing, and all the floaters and the noise getting distorted. That way it looked like you were actually entering the dream, the same way you would in real life. And it was like a good experiment. It was really interesting. It didn't work perfectly, but it was still really interesting to look at it. And at the same time, I also decided to do The Farmer as a little short film. It was only 1 minute long. And then I also did my first live-action film, The Skull That Haunted Me. Here I was just bored and I was depressed because this is the last time I'd ever visit a high school band contest, which we did at Florida, and I filmed there, making it the first time I filmed part of my film in Florida. Well, I'll get to that later. But then, it's like I filmed The Skull That Haunted Me. I was still in a really bad place, but then that changed with another really good turning point where I filmed with a few friends. I can't show the full footage because one of my friends doesn't want her image seen online. But I filmed, a little video for Spanish class. It didn't have to be anything spectacular, but I decided to actually film it in a more cinematic way, such as different angles and doing actual editing. And it was a really good turning point. I mean, it was nice outside. It was on Hattiesburg campus. I was filming with 2 really good friends of mine. It's made me think, hey, life in college, life with college friends might not be so bad after all. And then I finished a few other films that I started on but never finished, such as Streaking Through the School and The Dead to 2 Idiots and The Smart Detective.
Oh my God! He's naked on the toilet! Ugh. Stupid blanket.
And I also did The Cursed Game, which was loosely based on The Haunting of Ben. I started that in 2012, but never finished it, and decided I would just get it finished. And then I finally finished The Summer Life, and that was my very first feature film. So here's some footage of The Summer Life. Like, I got to do really nice edits and everything like that, especially combining footage. This is when I did that whole tracking shot, because, in band, I was able to, basically separate my body from my legs. So I can do that with the camera, where I can give smooth movement, or fairly smooth movement, without using a Steadicam. And I just walk with it the same way I'd march with my trumpet. And I shot in a very low-budget way, so I had that indie quality. And then at the end, whenever we were in Florida, I figured this is when the main character, Arthur, is overcoming his Asperger's syndrome, and it's much more wide and everything like that. It's much more big and grand. Wasn't anything perfect or spectacular, but it was a turning point. And in that Christmas, I got the Angry Video Game Nerd movie on DVD, because I was always obsessed with that series. And I got the movie on DVD, and it was very surreal watching the nerd on a TV screen as opposed to like a computer screen. And this made me realize everything was going to get much, much better after that. And so in 2016, that's when I felt very very accomplished. And then I was getting reintroduced to Land of the Lost, a TV show I absolutely love, and I decided I wanted to do something more along the lines of that. It's like even in 2013, I decided, I tried to do, combine stop motion and live action like Ray Harryhausen. I tried to do a short film based on Beowulf, and here you can actually see some footage of it that actually looks pretty good. So here's some footage of Grendel, like I would add a live action Beowulf in there, and then he'd tear off Grendel's arm. And obviously I got to use some fake blood, and that was nice. And you had like the backgrounds, and as well as a blue screen, I was going to try to combine it. So he's bleeding out, because if you got your arm ripped out like that, like realistically you'd be bleeding quite a lot. That's him going back to his mother, and then getting decapitated. And then I eventually, my old friends, apologized for their behavior, and our friendship was reinstated, and our little feud was over. And then I was really enjoying my time in college. Like, I enjoyed being in the film school, I enjoyed what we were doing, and I enjoyed everything we did with the Wesley Foundation, such as my new friends I made there, my experience at Statewide, my experience at the spring retreat. It was just a great year at that time. I mean, that entire semester in the spring of 2016, it was lightning in a bottle for me. It's like, I don't think that could ever be recaptured again. And then, I finished my first college film, OCD, off, which kind of went back to, the formula I created with 25 Cents of Stupidity about two idiots going at each other's throats. This time it was two idiots with OCD making everything uneven for each other. And then in the summer I was hanging out with my Wesley Foundation friends quite a lot, and so that was very refreshing, because in the summer I was hanging out with people, who were not my relatives, people I usually only see in school. And I reunited with Corin Roberts, and we worked on a few films with each other. So we worked on The Dark Castle, which I eventually finished recently this year in 2020. And then he also filmed a little short film called Writer's Block, in which I starred in. And at the same time, he also helped by doing voices for my animated film 3 Steps to Death, the prequel to 4 Steps to Insanity. And I decided I wanted to do a short little stop motion project after OCD off, so I did The Collector of Exshire England, which was like the silent films. And then eventually we finished Haunting the Escaped Convict, and we finished 3 Steps to Death at the end of that year. And then it was kind of unfortunate, because during the fall of 2016, while I was back at school, it's like I mentioned with that first time being lightning in a bottle, this just could not recapture that moment. And I was worried about graduating, I felt like I was not going to be ready for it. This here is one of the actors from the TV show Stranger Things. You're actually the first actor from a TV show I've ever met. Really? I'm going into filmmaking as a career too. That's awesome. Cool. Stranger Things was a huge inspiration, by the way. That's really, really cool. Cool. And here, just like the band TV show, I wanted to do a stop-motion show based on film class.
Oh, look at all these.
Hey, there's people over here. Let's talk to them. I'm bored.
Oh, you!
I'm not bored with you. And I still was working on Mindworms. I finished some more drafts, and I decided to send a very, very lengthy Facebook page telling everything, everyone about what I was doing and asking for actors. And it was an overwhelming response. I got a lot of people interested. And then came 2017. And here's a little miniature. This is going to be part of the underground cave for Mindworms. We never use it in the final film, though. So in 2017 comes along, and that's when we started to really film. I got friends ready, for, filming scenes for Mindworms, and at the same time, we were also working on a few other films that eventually got finished later, such as we did a short film loosely based on The Condemned House, which is a creepypasta, a very not-so-known creepypasta. I finished it recently as it was because it still had a few things that needed, but what we had still told the basic story, so, it was a few changes made, but they didn't hurt anything. I mean, adaptations are going to make changes anyway. And, we just kept filming as much as we could, and then graduation came along, and that's when it was really upsetting, because during that time, film school was just not the same. I feel like I drove away from what I was known for. It's like, even my senior film, He Got Served, I honestly am not too proud of that film. It really did not feel like the types of films I make, and I felt like it just wasn't the same anymore, really. And even film school really wasn't the same anymore. So I was trying to look for different jobs outside of film for a little while, and I hung out with the Wesley Foundation a lot. We did some filming during the summer of 2017, but then a lot of people had to do other things, and so felt like I went back to square one pretty much. So in 2017, I eventually got a job at Panera, which I'm still working at until I move away from Mississippi, because I love the people there. And then we decided, I also decided, I'd do some more filming, and 2018 came along. We also tried to film more of Lumberjack, and here we got some pretty good footage, but we were never going to finish it, and I wasn't really pleased with the results, especially because I made The Farmer Next Door, which was a much better slasher film in my opinion. So you might recognize this. I actually repurpose this as footage that the kids in Mindworms are watching on TV, so that way the footage didn't have to completely go to waste, just to acknowledge that it happens. So in 2018, we were once again back to square one because a lot of people had to leave. Then I decided to do a little bit of grad school in the theater department, and I figured, I just had to accept the fact that certain people were just going to have to be replaced, because there are certain people who I just could not rely on. And I had to understand that wasn't me being a jerk, it was just me being truthful. Now eventually contacted, you remember when I mentioned F.W. Waller? Let's unpin that from the wall. So I met this dude named Ian Waller in film school, and he did the film Feast of the Old Gods, which I starred in. And then, lo and behold, this was F.W. Waller, the same F.W. Waller I used to watch in high school.
Hello, my name is Ian Waller. I play Alex in Mindworms, and I was a film student at USM, which is where I met Patrick, and ever since I was a young kid, I've had a passion for movies and movie making. I think it started when I was in kindergarten and I saw The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad for the first time, and I had a nightmare about the sequence where the characters are in the cave and they're being chased by the dragon and the Cyclops. Anyways, I kind of first met Patrick by him being a classmate of mine, and I cast him in my first horror movie, Feast of the Old Gods, and that's how that's kind of how we met each other, and that's what gave him the idea to cast me in Mindworms, and I was attached to the whole idea because I really love old, cheesy, campy horror movies from the 80s and 70s, and it was a lot of fun to be involved with that. And I hope the movie entertains people and makes them laugh, and I hope I play a part of that. And yeah, I think that's about all I can really say.
Awesome, yeah. Along with that, I also met Eric Zala, the same Eric Zala who did the Raiders adaptation, and that's also a really good story. You should definitely read the book based on that and see the film. And I met Eric Zala. He was really cool. I'm Facebook friends with him, and he was a huge influence to me. well. But if you want to, I can show you the video real quick. Hey guys, you want to see the video?
Do we have to shoot anything else, or are we done for the day?
I think we're done for the day.
Okay, yeah, we marked it.
I'm just going to look at how I have it set up so I can set up for future reference.
Let's see.
And along with that, I decided, we got Ian Waller to play as Alex Terriot. And I got some different actors to play different roles. And then 2019 came along. So a little backtrack a little bit. In 2017, you may know the musician on YouTube, Eva Russell, and you may know her brother, Josh Russell, from J.R. Russell Studios. Well, I got to meet them because they went to the same school as me. I got them involved in the project, especially Josh. He was interested in the script, and I figured he was perfect for Dr. Bond.
Hi, I'm Eva Russell.
And I'm Joshua Russell.
Well, I first met Patrick at the Wesley Foundation at USM. That's where we go to school.
And I was the one, Eva was the one that introduced me to Patrick. And then around the time I first met Patrick, he introduced me to like 4 scripts. I mean, 4 of his movies that he's making so far, Mindworm being one of them. Mindworm was like the last film I actually read before I played in it, and I had to study it like 11 times to be exact. And before I met him at the Hasbro campus. At first, I didn't know what. At first, I was kind of nervous because of the lines. I was afraid I was going to mess up on the lines, but I did really good on it.
And then, in 2019, that was a major turning point because I feel like I was going back to my old self, in a good way, of course. I had a lot of really great friends, and we did a lot of filming, especially in the summer. It was productive. It was as close to finishing as we ever had been. I also had a nice little family reunion moment because when it comes to Cody's little siblings, Tyrone and Ellie, I always had them planned to be played by my cousins, Tucker and Matt. And, I got my wish one day where it was Easter of 2019. I came home pretty early from work, just working a morning shift. And they were visiting, especially Matt. They never really visit that often. And so I asked them if they wanted to be part of it, and they were like, sure. And so I filmed all their scenes. I made a few changes because they were originally younger when I wrote them. So I made a few changes that would have made sense to the age of the characters, and it worked, and they had a lot of fun. And it was just a nice, wholesome kind of family reunion moment, especially since this was when I was really getting my act together and a lot of good things were happening in my life.
I first met Patrick whenever he was my cousin. What was the other thing?
Just talk about how you got introduced to my filmmaking skills and everything.
I got introduced to your filmmaking skills
Well,
by
trying
you
to
talking about film and me listening.
Cool. And along with that, I also got accepted in the Disney College program. So I got to move to Disney and I got to work there for a while, and I really loved it. I really loved the people, I loved the company, and I even did, you remember when I mentioned I filmed in Florida? Well, unpin that too. I filmed my 25th short film, My Dark Discovery on the Dark Web, which I shot all in camera on my grandma's camcorder as an experiment. That was my first film shot entirely out of Mississippi. Along with that, a little backtracking, my 24th film was The Andersons' Day at the Beach, which was a hand-drawn, cartoon. Basically, I used tracing paper and did the animations on that and took pictures of it on the background. And I started that in 2012, but never finished it because I lost interest. But I decided to revisit it and eventually finish it.
You suck. Go! Ah, my nipples!
And then, I got extended in my Disney College program until 2020. We had fun, but unfortunately, COVID-19 hit. One of the biggest pandemics ever, and unfortunately, we had to be sent back home. So I was back home, pretty depressed, but I still got back to work on my film progress. So, I went back to doing more stop motion for Mindworms, and then I eventually decided there were there was something that always bugged me. There were two things I wanted to do in high school more than anything. Mindworms and some kind of low-budget slasher film. And so I decided this was going to be the time for me to visit that, the time for me to finish that, the time for me to get it all done and meet the end game. I also filmed a lot of it on Super 8, and here's all my Super 8 film cartridges. I use Ektachrome because Kodachrome can't be processed anymore. Ektachrome can be, and I might consider getting it processed and then digitally processed as like a special feature one day. I didn't do Super 8 for the green screen stuff because it wouldn't capture the green. So, I decided I would re-photograph the edited green screen stuff once it's projected on the wall, using the Super 8 camera. That's all my Super 8 films. I also show you all my props. Like this here is my grandparents' house. That's where I spent most of my childhood at. This is where, this is basically my studio. There's my grandparents' house, and that's my aunt's old house that she's moving from. We use that as a location in the farmer next door. And this was also the inside of Butch's Butcher Shop in Mindworms. And there's just, a storage room there, and over there's the shed that we also use for farmer next door, because it was perfect. But in that building, there is a little storage area that we could use that I had all my props in. So here we are about to go inside. And there it is, you might recognize that. I think I may have even used this in some of my earlier films, long before Mindworms. Being careful because there's a big spider, over there that I don't want to have jump on me. I have to check the light switch for spiders before I turn it on. I haven't learned that the hard way, I just learned that by common sense. And there's a prop room, and yes, it is definitely a mess. Not all of it is my props, though. But I'll definitely show you them, There's the typewriter, which, funny story about that, I got that from my old job in the biology lab, because they found it and weren't using it anymore. And this cereal box, I made that on my own. I made it, then I made a copy of it and colored it so that way I'd have a master. And there's a newspaper, on the front, it has a picture of Eric Zala. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's the inside. I'll talk about that in a little while, too. There's the charred head of the taxi driver. And up there, that corpse head that was used for both the condemned house and for farmer next door. It's originally used for condemned house, and I repurposed it in farmer next door. There's the farmer next door props, and right there in the background, there's the remains of the puppet for Jim, and in the background there's the puppet for Lucian. I actually went and used, different ideas. I'll talk about the puppets in a little while. And there's, the puppet for the corpse. There's that house for Drag Race. And then there's the head of the corpse. Yep, I used a plastic skull and just added latex and clay and fake hair. Worked really well, looked really realistic. And here is the head of Jim, made of styrofoam, and that spinal cord is made out of a toy rubber snake I got at Disney once, and it kind of melted and wasn't any good, so I painted it flesh colored and repurposed it. There's some plastic bones, and then there's some bones made of clay, especially the spine that I made. And here, this was a fossil I made. I made it out of drying clay. After it dried, I painted it, and it looked really nice. And there's the flyer for that. Like, if you're wondering where that came from where, you know, my friends Clint and Matt improvised that whole scene where those two guys come out. I always envisioned them as, like, traveling musicians, but Clint jokingly envisioned them as a gay BDSM couple. So I decided to make it a joke where they're a musician, except it was the bellicose, dynamic, symphonic musical duo. And along the puppets, let me talk about that a little bit. So I got these PVC pipes, and I just, you know, connected them and cut them in a specific way using a PVC pipe cutter. And I drilled some holes in there so that way I could have the arms kind of dangling, so that way they weren't completely stiff. I also use articles of clothing. Like for the corpse, I use an old article of clothing that I got from a thrift store. I filled it with cotton and duct taped it at the end. Then for Lucian, I got an old shirt that I used to wear back in high school band. It even had some stains on it from, you know, when my trumpet would leak on it. I just, you know, I filled it with cotton and duct taped it. And then it's the arms, I made the spikes in his arms out of paper that I painted, and then I made the actual flesh of the arms out of trash bags. Especially the hands, I made those first, because they were going to be gloves. I just made those out of trash bags, added some cotton, and painted them a little bit. Then whenever I added the heads, I put little pins in through the collar into the neck, so that way they'd stick. So here you can actually see some of the puppet, showing it as best as I can because it's kind of trapped. But there's like one of the hands. There's some trash bags I painted for gore. There's some gory props that I never really got to use, and there's one of the fake arms I used for Detective Adams. And here is the newspaper. At the top you see it's Eric Zala. At a specific moment when he did the Raiders adaptation, he never used it. And I actually read the book. And so I actually read through the book and looked at, you know, that time period, 1985, 1984, to see, you know, where he was, so that way I could get it, you know, as accurate as possible. Then you also see some information for Peter Jackson filming Bad Taste, because that was very influential. Now on the back, I just used like an old sports newspaper that I copied and pasted off of Google Images. And then here in the middle, you see the death of the archaeologist. That's referring to Clinton West from 3 Steps to Death, since that takes place before this. Then you see the information for the haunted church at the Unholy Land. And then you see the information for an unlucky hotel, and that's saved for another project I have coming probably at Disney or something like that. And then you have some information about the Mutant Walrus movie, as well as the funnies. You have Misbehaved Milton. He was a character I created. And here with the cereal box, I made it where it was a decoder thing. So I added where there was like certain symbols that represented letters, and they were supposed to use that to find buried treasure. And so you had a little decoder and a little piece of paper that talked about it. And here's some of the Misbehaved Milton tapes, such as The Early Years, a Misbehaved Milton movie where he goes to camp. Then you have Willie Williamson. He's basically like Charlie Chaplin. There he is in a movie where he's shipwrecked, and there he is in a tape that's about like some of his early years. And here's one of Detective Adams' sleazy magazines that never made in the final film. And then there's that. Then you have Big Booty Judy. That was the nickname of some slut I knew in high school. And then what may or may not be a gay porno. And then you have an adult version of Misbehaved Milton. Like, I figured in the film's universe, Misbehaved Milton is in the public domain, so somebody did an adult version to copy off of Fritz the Cat. And you also have the cyberpunk rock comic books, and gave them really punk rock, cyberpunk type of looks, inspired by Akira and Blade Runner. Then you have the Laserdisc, which has, you know, some information about it. Here's Lucian's head. And right here you see that's Lucian's styrofoam head. And I'm trying, and if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm trying to move it, but I don't want to reach back there because, you know, spiders, so I'm trying to move it. And that is my storage area. And here in my mom's craft room, here is some other props I made. Like, that's the models of the characters for whenever they had to appear in certain areas. They weren't as realistic, but I tried to use as many lighting techniques. And there's Cassidy, he's fallen apart. And there's the head of Cooper whenever he rips him out of his body, Mortal Kombat style. That's also fallen apart, but that's the body for Jim with his intestines. There's the taxi driver, and right there that's Curtis, who is played by my brother. That's when he gets half his face blown off. Then there's a hand. I bought that off of Amazon, especially because this is in the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is a prop I made. I made it with a rubber glove and cotton and plastic bags and everything like that. And I eventually repurposed this for Dr. Mike's skull, but this is the head of the taxi driver when he gets his jaw knocked off. And you see the worm tongue. And that's a fake sandwich I made in theater class. Looks really nice. Those are the Mindworms, especially made little ones for whenever they're younger. And I made different segments for the leader because the worm leader gets longer progressively throughout the movie to fit into the spine. There's the other Mindworms, and that's the mutant walrus, repurposed from another model I did. And then there's Ian Waller's stop-motion model, Alex Terriot. And that's his fake chest. There's a story as to why his arms, well, first of all, here's Detective Adams. I made his shirt out of a garbage bag and just painted it. But anyway, I'll just give you a little backstory. There's like a deleted scene. There's going to be a truck battle where Ian's character would fight with Clayton on a truck that was being driven by George, and he'd lose his arms, and then Alex would lose his arms and get kicked off and impaled on a tree branch, but then he'd just get up and his arms would rejoin him, but he wouldn't have the sleeves anymore. I even thought of having him steal a motorcycle at one point to be more badass, but that never happened, though that might be explored in a remake later on, because I do have plans to do a remake of this. And here's the stop-motion model of Lucian. I actually used an armature from an old armature I made, and it, was really sturdy. Definitely not perfect, but it still worked for what it was. Made the pants out of clay, and I made the shirt out of cloth. And here, we never actually used this, but this is going to be a miniature shown in the bowling alleys. And right here on my phone, I just use a picture of a kitchen. And this kind of gave, the basic idea of where everything was. And here is when the worm leader is crawling out from underneath the butcher shop. I just used like a metal thing I used for a different prop. And added, some green there and some vegetation. And it looked really nice. And I had to animate it backwards so I could push him back under there. And here's some of the simple green screen stuff I did. Like when the worm leader is crawling towards Lucian, I basically just filmed him from a green screen, so that way you got the idea of how long he was. And this was originally going to be used in a different scene, but that never came along, so I decided to repurpose it for this. And there's Lucian in front of the green screen for certain simple things, like whenever he's in the lab and everything like that. And then here is when I did some of the dynamation, similar to Ray Harryhausen. So, I had it set up where I could press the little key and it would go frame by frame. It was very painstaking, but I basically would go frame by frame with Cody and animate Lucian accordingly. And here I basically used trash bags and a cardboard box and some fake blood, and that was originally used in Unholy Land. And here I decided to do the cemetery a little different, so I printed a picture and filmed it like that so it looked more 80s. And then that also worked because they did something similar to this in a Roger Corman film back in the 50s, I think, or 60s, where I got these pictures. I just animated the worms crawling on them, especially here with the buildings. There's the 25 cents of stupidity building. Use that in the foreground, and it actually looked really nice. It had a nice low-budget charm to it.
So this here is the church's multi-purpose building. Like right here is a wall for the bowling alley. We put the main one right here. And just later I have my green screen, so I set up like a little studio. This will be a little crawly cave. Like to be crouched down. I'm going to add some vegetation sometime tomorrow morning. This will be part of the cave. It'll be filmed at an angle like this. The darkness to kind of compensate for it. Hoping the duct tape will stay. Gonna have to not use the ceiling fan or else it will blow some of it off, which will kind of suck, but it won't take too long. And this will be a shot for when they crawl out, and I'll also add some vegetation here. They'll be used mainly for B-roll footage with the skeleton. I'll add the 8mm camera and the little book tomorrow. Over here is the hieroglyphic wall. We'll shoot at different angles. I'll do like we did on the previous shot, or like for the other angle, it'll be right here. I'll have them turn around for whenever they look at the meteorite, which will be used with the green screen. Hoping this will all stay up. Like I'm using this little scaffolding thing to hold this to add some extra cave wall. A little bit I have to go home see so I can help Dad with the. So I'm going to try to borrow some vegetation from here. So I had the vegetation, like some right here near the skeleton, not too hard. Same right here. So it was a little hard because I had to add tape. I mean, not here, but let's say this here. Here's a little crawly cave, and here's like a little roots. Excuse me, gives them more realism. And right here, so I had a little bit of vegetation. Probably gonna have to borrow like a big flashlight from Grandma and Grandpa. Let me turn off the light in here. I'm gonna do this really quick, my dad probably needs me to help with the chickens, and due to the metal reinforcement, I can't get any signal down here. And so here, last but not least, here's the little hieroglyphics. Added some little vegetation. Might add some more tomorrow. It might work as it is. And one kind of in front of it, that way it can be pushed to the side. Works. Probably gonna borrow some masking tape because that's ironically a little stickier than the duct tape. But I'll just leave this here, have a good reference. Then, you know, if any of it falls apart, I mean, it shouldn't be all of it. I can put it back together tomorrow.
One thing I will say about this is one of the biggest things that happens, even though I was kind of upset that it took so long to make this film, I'm actually kind of glad because it gave me the opportunities to write the characters more, such as omitting like the aforementioned love triangle plot with Jonathan and getting rid of the character of Beatrice Gertrude. I even got to rewrite the bully characters a little bit. One thing I really hate is when critics say that bullies in movies are unrealistic because they have no reason to do what they do, when that's real life. Bullies are just complete assholes for no reason. But I still want to have some kind of relevance to the plot and still make them unlikable but not go too far. It's like there's certain levels you won't go to. Like, let's say in a B-rated horror film like this, you can show it like an animal, like a puppy or a kitten in danger, but you never show them getting killed or anything like that. That's just, you don't go there. And so you might remember the two bullies, Zach and Tanner, the innocent ones who turned good. Originally, back when they didn't have names, they were just as bad as the other ones and were also supposed to have been killed. But because they're played by Gage and David, they just look so innocent that I thought killing them off just seemed way too unnecessarily cruel. Like, even though Gage had a character who got killed in Clint's previous film, Gifts, that at least was meant to be an emotional scene. So I decided to rewrite them in the final draft that I used as the shooting script in 2018. And this time I made it where, you know, I gave them names. I named them after actual jackasses I knew from high school. Except, you know, Alex Terriot, I used the name Alex because the actual bully's first name wasn't really that intimidating, so I used Alex. And then I named Zach and Tanner that because I had the intention of having them turn good, so that way, you know, they were like the innocent people. And then I named them Zach and Tanner because I was named after two people I knew in high school who were douchebags, but then owned up and apologized for their behavior. So it's kind of like a little thumbs up to that, while the other two bullies is a big middle finger to them. And Zach and Tanner are also, I'm hoping they kind of have the same reflection as like the other people watching it. So it's like the first time you just see the bullies beating up Cody and Clayton, calling them homophobic slurs. Some people might be uncomfortable about that, but just keep in mind that's just part of the characters, and they do get their comeuppances. So you see them beating them up, which is a douchey thing, but that's not something people take too seriously. They just see that as, that's just roughhousing. Then you see them robbing, you know, the place, and that's still kind of, you know, petty, but still not a good thing. And then you see them vandalizing the tombstones, and that's when it's like, wow, these people are. And even like Zach and Tanner were like that. That's when they started to realize, okay, these guys are going way too far. I don't think we should be following them anymore. And I also added more character personality to the characters. Like, the character of Tiffany was just the girl. Like, she didn't really have a lot of personality when I first wrote her. So I based her off of a few friends of mine from the Wesley Foundation, making her kind of cynical, like a lovable, sarcastic cynic. And in the end, really, this 10-year process was really the best thing that happened to Mindworms, because it was able to give it more flair, more character, and it ended up really working. 408, Friday, August 21st, 2020. The very last shot of the movie, and on the freeze frame. All I have to do is editing so far. This is the final part of Mindworms I have to do. The final thing I have to animate or film. All that's left is the editing. Can't believe I'm saying this, but for Mindworms after 10 years, that's a wrap. That's a wrap. As I mentioned before, one of the things I absolutely love about this film is not only that we got it done, not only that it was very much the way I wanted it to be, but it was a return to form. And of course, yeah, it wasn't exactly how I planned it, but I think it still worked for the better. Like, it felt like it brings me back to that innocent time where I was, in my last years of high school with my friends, and I was getting used to college. And when I was doing little videos like Why Summer Band is Fun and 25 Cents to Stupidity, then moving on to horror films like 4 Steps to Insanity and The Skull That Haunted Me. And even a few of the stuff I did in 2016 when I got more used to college. Because I feel like, later on in 2016, 2017, I really lost my touch. It's like, even my senior film in college, he got served. I have to admit, if you guys like it, it's fine, but I have to admit that the more I look back on it, the more painful it is to look at. Then, of course, we did Unholy Land, and that was a little bit more along the lines of what I do, but even then, it still is kind of a chore to sit through. Then I finished Paranormal Kids, because, I started that in film school, but I didn't finish it until 2018. And even then, just looking at Paranormal Kids kind of hurts to watch sometimes, because it brings me back to a time where I wasn't in a good place. Because here, it's kind of like, I felt like I was trying to please everyone. I wanted to please a lot of pretentious people. They basically thought real art had to be, like, depressing or sad or soulless. That you couldn't be a real artist if you did something fun and trivial. Heck, I've even been trying to please the nostalgia critic, but then knowing Doug Walker and all his controversy going on, it's just, that doesn't interest me anymore, really. It's like I've gotten out of the habit of being a people pleaser. And, along with Paranormal Kids, I just felt like I made that film a little too dark than it needed to be. It's one of the things that makes Mindworms much better. And I feel like it's a nice little conclusion. It's not going to be the last film I ever do, but it is going to be my last film for a while. After that, I'm going to move on to different things such as career building, living a normal life, writing some novels. And I feel like, like I said, Mindworms, it was like a relief and a breath of fresh air. It felt much more like classic me. It felt much more like the types of films I wanted to do. It felt more like the way I'd want it to be if I made it in 2014. And I think this really worked in its favor, because, if I did it way too early, it would just be kind of average. If I did it too later, it would just be a big budget blockbuster and nothing memorable. But here in this middle ground, I feel like I've gained much more skills. I'm at that time in my life where it's a good way to kind of end it, pretty much. Because I made 30 films, and in this year I've reached the end game by doing both a slasher film, which is something I've wanted to do since high school, and finishing Mindworms. And with it being my 30th film, and with it going to be my last film for a while, I think that's a good way to end it, as a return to form. You could think of it like the Indiana Jones trilogy, where they did Raiders, which established the Indiana Jones formula. Then they did Temple of Doom, which was still a good movie, but still very, very different and very, very dark. So they did Last Crusade, and it was much more like Raiders and definitely was a return to form and a really good sentimental way to end it. And that's one of the best things is, that's one of the things I didn't really like about my college films that much, was they didn't have too much sentimental value. Well, Mindworms definitely has some kind of sentimental value, definitely some special type of charm. And for what it is, I'm definitely proud of it. And I'm proud to have finished it. And I'm happy you guys get to watch it, and I hope you all enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. This is it. I never thought I'd get to it, but it's finished. I mean, wow, man. It's kind of sad too, because all the daydreaming and everything is over, and now I have, but at the same time, now I have other things to look forward to, other projects, other books, other careers. I think I feel free. Let me bring this with me, I don't want to leave it.